system is counter to social progress fundamentally, for it is based on the deliberate withholding of efficiency. And by the way, I haven't even addressed the traditional corruption that we see occurring on a daily basis, based and derived from this incentive for income, which spreads like a malignant cancer of indifferent self-interest, from product dishonesty, murder, fraud, theft, slave labor, outsourcing, price fixing, monopolistic collusion, redundant waste, environmental exploitation, illegal taxation, institutional theft, societal indifference, imposed psychological distortions, or advertising, and of course, the sickest monetary incentive ever created, war. That is the reality of the monetary incentive. And the final myth for now, the freedom of choice. The free market is very persuasive for most people because it appears that the possibilities are endless and that they, the individual, have limitless choices. People witness the vast stratification of goods and services portrayed by the media and advertising and think that since the options just exist in abstraction, it has some form of relevance to the freedom of the individual. They can walk into a store and choose between 25 kinds of detergent and 75 kinds of sugar-coated cereal, yet they turn a blind eye with the fact that their lives are managed by, on average, 2 political parties. They pay no attention to the reality that 40% of the world's wealth is owned by 1% of the population, and thus 99% of the world's people will never obtain the luxuries afforded by the 1%. More specifically, everyone seems oblivious to the reality that nearly every day of your life, you are forced by the obligation of mere survival and, of course, debt which is imposed into a private dictatorship where most of your decisions are controlled by those in the next artificially created hierarchical degree, the next larger hierarchical degree. It's amazing to me when you talk to economists and they say, well, people have a choice of where they work. They only have a choice of where they work within a specific frame that is allowable based on their demographic of education, if you will. And of course, there's so many friend orientations in business. The ultimate fantasy is that anyone can be president in the United States. This is something that's been perpetuated. Like these are groups that perpetuate themselves elitism. And elitism works in the same way in the corporate world. You are absolutely restricted. You have no freedom because you're forced to do the work as it is. And it's amazing to me, and I get this argument a lot from high-end economists. They say that you have freedom of choice. You can choose where you work. No, you really can't. When you get out of college, there's this wall of jobs, and you can find your slot, and that's about it. That's your choice. It's a preset choice. So I ask you, what freedoms are we talking about? You're only as free as your purchasing power will allow you to be. And the statistics have proven that the socioeconomic rank you are born into tends to persist for the rest of your life. If you are born poor, you will likely remain poor. Why? Because all the odds are against you. If you are rich, you will likely remain rich. Why? Because all the odds are in favor. It is the nature of the system. For example, if you have $1 million and put it into a CD at 5% interest, you're going to generate $50,000 a year simply for that deposit. You are making money off money itself. Paper being made on top of paper, nothing more. No invention, no contribution to society, no nothing. That being denoted, if you are lower to middle class, who is limited in funds, and must get interest-based loans to buy your home or use credit cards, then you are paying interest into the bank, which the bank is then using, in theory, to pay the person's return with the 5% CD. Not only is this equation outrageously offensive due to the use of usury or interest to steal from the poor and give to the rich, but it also perpetuates class stratification by its very design, keeping the lower classes poor under the constant burden of debt and servitude, while keeping the upper classes rich with no means to, with the means to simply turn excess money into more money. The very idea that you can take money and turn it into more money is absolutely hilarious and corrupt. Likewise, it should be no surprise that the world is run by cartels and government collusion. For competition is based on nothing more than a gaming strategy, as we have said. In other words, competition breeds corruption. This is another one of those economist things where they say, oh, the free market used to be great, but something happened and now we have all these cartels. Now, monopoly is the final stage of success in a competitive environment. It is incredible to me how people don't realize this. It doesn't matter how much legislation that you have to combat sector or industry dominance, it will keep occurring. Even more powerfully, government coercion by big business is also unstoppable. It is a natural progression of market strategy to get government on your side. In fact, the true propensity of our world economic system continually, year by year, approaches one thing: fascism. Or more specifically, inverted fascism. This is the condition where corporations covertly control government policy. This is the natural gravitation. So as time continues to move forward and you keep looking back, it seems like things always get worse, and they do. And this leads me to part 2, culture and the biosocial imperative. So this is a detour now. I hope that first section, if you have any questions, keep them in mind when we go to the Q&A. In this section, we are going to address some issues regarding our physical and social selves. This is very, very relevant to me, and I think very relevant to the whole argument, and unfortunately, again, most never think about this subject at all. In order for us to consider routes of social change, we must also have a clear understanding of conditioning, our biology, and our relationship to the environment. As denoted before, when it comes to the pursuits of social change, the most profound hurdle is overcoming the traditional ideology, identifications, and dogmas which have been set in stone as final by the established culture. Of these ideas, a consistent one that comes up has to do with the conclusion that the human being is of a rigid, fixed nature, whereas certain behaviors are simply immutable. Therefore, as the logic goes, social structures are locked into a set pattern, which cannot be overcome due to the very nature of the species. In order to address this claim, we need to first consider the ramifications of culture itself. The word culture in a social sense is defined as a set of shared attributes, values, goals, and practices that characterizes an institution, organization, or group. The most obvious, yet often overlooked example of the mechanics of culture is the fact that we are provably shaped by the sort of society we live in. The language you use, the gaming strategies you execute for survival, the perception of beauty you lust for, the familial patterns and traditions you perpetuate, and the deeply held theology, myths, and urban legends that define your broadest view are all examples of the qualities you might absorb arbitrarily from the culture you have been born into. In fact, if you dig deeper, you find that there is really nothing that we cognitively think and believe which isn't first presented to us in some environmental form. An insulted man who pulls out a gun and shoots somebody had to learn at some point in his life what a gun was, how to pull the trigger, along with what he was to find insulting to begin with. Every word that I am saying has been learned one way or another. Every concept relayed is a collective accumulation of experience. A Chinese baby taken at birth and raised in a British family in England will develop the language, dialect, mannerisms, traditions, and accent of the British culture. Needless to say, it is obvious the profound effect the environment has on behavior. But that's only part of the equation, for we are obviously biologically defined as well. It doesn't matter how much time I try to condition a cat to learn to speak English, it simply can't. Simply due to the limitations of its evolutionarily derived biological state. Those limitations are basically defined by genes. Genes are a fairly recent discovery, and there has been a great deal of speculation as to the spectrum that genes hold. The spectrum of relevance that genes hold. The most contentious is in the realm of behavioral biology. This is a field dedicated to understanding how genetics influences behavior. The idea that genetics are the possible source of various behaviors became popular in about the 19th century. One of the first pursuits that emerged was the idea that the aberrancies of human behavior, such as criminality, could be explained by a person's genes. You know, the old criminal gene idea. Sickly enough, even eugenics operations in the form of sterilization took place many years ago in an attempt to rid society of, quote, criminals, idiots, imbeciles, and rapists. The implication is that certain people are naturally, quote, bad people due to their genetics. You see this rhetoric everywhere. Someone might say,